The number 40 is symbolic in religions from Islam to Christianity, and a 40-day event often represents a test, a transition, or a purification. And some say that this idea of a biblical storm or test might have inspired Ukraine's 40-day deep strike campaign against Russia, which concluded this past Wednesday. In the June 25th announcement of the campaign, President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed that the goal of these strikes was to pressure the Russian state to the point where it would be compelled to end its invasion. So, did it work? I'm Anna Belokur reporting to you from Kyiv. Now that the campaign has concluded, we're going to look at whether it succeeded or failed to tip the scales in Ukraine's favor, both on the battlefield and in negotiations. And we'll also look ahead, because although the symbolic 40 days of this campaign are up, some speculate that it might just be the beginning of a longer one. Zelensky billed this campaign as 40 days of hellfire raining down on Russia. This would be achieved with dozens of long-range strikes on key targets deep in Russian territory. But why now? What does the timing of this campaign tell us? I'm joined by my colleague, Tim Zadorozhnyy, to tell us more. So what kind of targets were on the list for this campaign?
Yeah, so as a part of this campaign, Ukraine targeted, of course, military sites in Russia, including Russia's logistics, Russian warehouses where they store weapons, etc. But also, as a part of this campaign, Ukraine targeted Russia's shadow fleet as a part of another campaign to disrupt logistics to Crimea. That was also an important part. And of course, no one admits that it's part of this campaign, but Ukraine also targeted Wildberries warehouses. So Wildberries is Russia's kind of Amazon. So it's like a huge store where you can buy everything, but Ukrainian officials, they don't really admit that it's part of this campaign. But of course, it was something that we haven't seen before. So yeah, it was also an important part of this. But also, what we've seen is that Russia faced some kind of shortage of gasoline. In Russian cities, especially in Crimea, there were like huge lines on gas stations to procure it. But not only there, in Russia's rear, but also on the front lines too. I saw a lot of reporting from Russian military bloggers that their troops, they are struggling to get basically gasoline for their troops, and that was also an important part of it, because Russian military bloggers, they were just crying online, saying that our boys on the front lines, they are struggling to get gasoline for their like military vehicles, and we need to support them. It was an important part because it had a psychological effect on the Russian people. You know, actually there was a lot of psychological and like this cognitive thing there, because first we saw Russians staying in lines to procure, to basically buy gasoline.
And I imagine there's an economic element as well, where when stuff gets destroyed and there are fewer exports, that must drive inflation, right?
Of course, it drives inflation. It creates a lot of problems for small business. And Wildberries was actually, it's almost 45% of online marketing in Russia. They sell stuff, so it's like a giant. It's a giant corporation.
And why is this happening now? What's the significance of the timing?
Yeah, right. So it is not a good moment for the Russian authorities, because just in a month, on September 18th, they have a scheduled parliamentary election. It's not like Vladimir Putin's party is going to lose during the election, but for them, it's a pretty inconvenient moment, because before that, in early spring, they started this very unpopular campaign of trying to restrict internet access in Russia. They also banned like the most popular messages in Russia. It was like super unpopular among the Russian people. They were like super mad about this, and actually they like scaled back this campaign. They unblocked some messengers, and after that, there was a lot of talk of possible mobilization in Russia, because on the front lines, they are not doing well, and a lot of people started talking that like we're not advancing, so probably the Russian like president could decide to start another mobilization, because like this kill zone, when there are like only drones and not people fight, it's getting like longer and longer. So yeah, it's like a choice he faces. You can just freeze the war, or you can escalate more. There are like no signs that Vladimir Putin wants to end this war, unfortunately. And the Ukrainian officials, they see this, but they believe that for Vladimir Putin, it's like an important point where you can just decide to not escalate it further. Yeah, so I guess we'll see after the election how it's gonna go.
Yeah, I think it'll be an eventful fall either way.
Definitely.
Beyond the objective success of Ukraine hitting a bunch of targets and eroding public trust among Russians, there were also some secondary wins to be had from the campaign. Ukraine had the opportunity to show off its strategic prowess, as well as the capabilities of the homegrown long-distance drones it's been developing. All these objectives can be summed up into one overarching goal: to weaken Russia, militarily, economically, and socially, to the point where it wouldn't be able to continue waging war, or would at least be forced to compromise its hardline stance in largely stalled negotiations. Several days after the campaign's end, we can agree that the goal wasn't achieved in its most literal extreme. The war continues, the Russian war machine does keep moving, and the Kremlin hasn't publicly softened on any stance. But in the next section, we'll look at some particular highlights and what they might mean for the future. But before we go on, I have a quick request. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, please click the button below. You'll get not just this show in your feed, but all of the Kyiv Independent's field reports, interviews, explainers, and more. And don't forget to hit the bell icon to be notified when a new video comes out. And if you'd like to get further involved, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community, a group of motivated supporters who help us build the future of independent journalism in Ukraine. We are approaching 35,000 members from around the world, and we'd love for you to join us. For more information, visit the link in the description below or scan the QR code. Okay, let's get into the results of the campaign. The 40 days did yield some severe destruction of Russian infrastructure. June and July were full of viral social media videos showing huge burns at military sites, refineries, and factories, many in the Moscow and St. Petersburg metropolitan areas. Ukraine reported successful strikes on military airfields as far away as Dagestan, taking out multiple bomber planes. Dozens of oil refineries were also hit, with up to 35% of overall gas production disrupted at the most severe points of the campaign. The last weeks were most notoriously defined by a series of strikes on factories belonging to online retail giant Wildberries, which is Russia's version of Amazon. The company denies that they sell military items, despite previously having a section on their website called Everything for the Special Military Operation, which is what Russia calls the invasion of Ukraine. This section has been removed since the strikes on factories began. But either way, other large commercial factories in Russia have reportedly been installing lettering on their roof to self-identify as not Wildberries to any incoming drones. The Ukrainian official who spoke with us anonymously said that internal Russian business documents show that these strikes on commercial hubs do a lot to drive inflation and to bring the economic effects of the war to civilians across the country, because many Russians use Wildberries in the way that many Westerners use Amazon. And because it plays an important role in domestic commerce for a wide range of industries, there are also business owners taking to social media to complain about the lost inventory, which apparently is not being compensated for.
Here's the value of the inventory we had stored at one of the Wildberries warehouses that was attacked. Now, I'll show you how much Wildberries decided to compensate us today. Voluntary compensation for goods damaged as a result of force majeure. And the amount is 10,687 rubles and 94 kopecks.
The 40-day campaign also saw significant results in Russian-occupied Crimea, where drone strikes on military and energy infrastructure all but canceled the tourist season and saw long lines of cars retreating to the Russian mainland. Although still not fully blockaded off, Crimea is facing some of its most dire conditions since Russia's 2014 annexation, with fuel and resource shortages compounding as the peninsula's exit points are cut off one by one. Moscow still hasn't formulated a solid political or military response to the humiliation, because Crimea was its original trophy, and things could not be going worse there over a decade later. Even Russian public commentators are struggling to put a positive spin on things, with one previously pro-Putin vlogger begging his fans to ignore disinformation and stay off the peninsula for their own safety. But that speaks to the campaign's more abstract goal, the goal of rooting into the minds of Russian people and making them question their safety and the competence of their leaders. And on that front, we can say that the 40-day campaign has yielded strong results. Russia's Public Opinion Foundation recorded a 5% drop in Vladimir Putin's approval ratings in just 1 week in July, which is the most it's dropped in a single week since the start of the full-scale invasion. Social media has been full of videos like this.
Today, Wildberries warehouses in Krasnodar and Nevinomessk burned down. The rest of my goods were stored there. As of today, I'm officially poor, officially unemployed. I'll go home now, pay my taxes with the money I have left, and that's it.
It's May 7th, it wouldn't be so bad. We're sitting outside because it's impossible to be inside. It's so warm, but it's also impossible to be outside because the sirens are wailing. And I'm just overwhelmed right now. I don't know, for the first time since this whole situation began in our country, it's really hit me. I'm already tired. You know, it hits you when you hear that hum. And it seems like we have two sirens going off at the same time again. We've grown up. My grandmother was a child of war. My grandfather was a child of war. And now our children have become children of war too. It's the 21st century. We thought this would never happen again, but it is happening.
Honestly, I'm scared. What's happening in Russia now is no joke. When it was happening somewhere far away, you still thought that it was okay. But then, 50 kilometers away from you, a huge plant was blown up. The realization that this is already happening somewhere very close to your home, this is truly terrifying. So you get the point, right? The whole situation is absurd. You know who started the war. He orchestrated all this. And if a drone hits your home, you have to sort it all out yourself. It's just such a mess. What's going on? What's going on? They've simply destroyed the country. There's no Ukraine left. Now they've taken over for us. This is so guys. This is seriously scary. You know who is behind this. And we, ordinary people, are paying. You are responsible. You started all this. What does this have to do with us? Why should ordinary people always suffer?
Various public events in Moscow and St. Petersburg, including the annual Navy Day parade, were canceled due to ongoing strikes. And President Zelensky even made a tongue-in-cheek joke about it to U.S. President Donald Trump when the two met at the NATO summit in early July.
Would you go to Moscow?
It's difficult. There are a lot of Ukrainian drones there. That's right. It's dangerous.
He doesn't want to be hit by a drone.
Europe.
No, it's hard. It's hard to go to Moscow.
Maybe it's a coincidence that during this campaign, the U.S. has started toying, however coyly, with the idea of licensing Patriot interceptor production to Ukraine. Or maybe it's not a coincidence, but the bottom line is that the more Ukraine distinguishes itself militarily over Russia, the more allies treat it as a peer to be learned from rather than a charity case to be aided. And that is as important a part of winning the war as destroying any singular target. Although branded differently, this campaign does not exist in a vacuum. It's a continuation of a strategy and sets the stage for future operations. I'm joined by Pasi Paroinen, an analyst with the Blackbird Group, to discuss how the campaign has changed the calculus militarily. Now, the first question I have is very broad, but what were the main military victories of this campaign, and how much has the Russian war machine been affected?
Well, militarily, if we're talking about the Ukrainian long-range campaign and the increase also in the intensity of the mid-range strikes, militarily, it's difficult to assess what is the direct implications on Russian operations, but it certainly has made it more difficult for them. As for overall Russian progress this year has been I would say, very painful, very bad. Their gains have gone down from like 300, 400 square kilometers per month to occasionally dipping even to the negatives, but on average, I would say this year under 100 square kilometers per month. So the Russian rate of advance has suffered, and the timing coincides with the Ukrainian strikes, so there could be very well a connection there. In general, like several factors that kind of maybe took many of us by surprise was the sheer intensity of the Ukrainian strike campaign this summer. Like this summer, of course, it began earlier in the spring. There were many like necessary steps in it, like first striking against the Russian air defenses, depleting them in southern Ukraine, and then the long-range strikes against refineries, for example, and as well as the mid-range strikes against logistics, they intensified. And that intensification, the number of strikes being done every day and every week, grew exponentially. And of course, it is very difficult to predict exponential growth before. Like it was very difficult to see how this kind of operation could come about before it happened. And now that it is ongoing, it is difficult to estimate what is the upper limits of the what can be achieved with these strikes. So I urge to be patient and see where this goes, and it is very important that these strikes continue, because, for example, with the refineries, now that there are clearly showing results that it is putting pressure on the Russian economy, it is causing fuel shortages, now you need to keep going. And the question is, can Ukraine keep going with these strikes? And one thing that it surely needs is money to finance this, because it's not free, it is expensive to launch these attacks. Individual drones may be cheap, individual home produced cruise missiles, for example, may be cheaper than what's available elsewhere. But the numbers that you need to make these strikes make it that the total cost of the strike campaign is quite considerable.
If we temper with caution, here's what we can safely say. Destroying refineries at this intensity will continue to erode Russia's economy and slow down its war machine. Ongoing strikes on occupied territory like Crimea prevents Russia from using those regions as staging grounds or holding them up as propagandistic trophies. And the more expensive and inconvenient the war becomes for everyday Russians, the more criticism they'll level at their leaders. So in all of these senses, the campaign and any continuation of it is a net positive for Ukraine. The cost is relatively low compared to the reward. But 40 days was not enough to bring Russia to the negotiating table, and disturbingly, Ukrainian civilian deaths from Russian airstrikes have also been on the rise throughout this period. The battlefield remains stagnant in the same way it's been for months. Drone warfare dominates, and Ukraine struggles to liberate territory as much as Russia struggles to capture it. Both sides are facing manpower shortages and compounding economic and demographic crises, and neither side is able to force the other's hand in diplomatic chambers. That has not changed in the last 40 days. Russia has avoided mass mobilization since 2022, while Ukraine has had it on a rolling basis. And the main reason for Putin's avoidance of it is that he knows he'll lose a lot of popularity for himself, his government, and the war itself when Russian men start getting called up at scale. So in this sense, Ukraine's attempts to demoralize the Russian public now are setting the stage for a deeper dissatisfaction later on, when recently elected or re-elected officials start calling for another round of mobilization. And again, this is why it's important for Ukraine that the residents of Moscow and St. Petersburg are already fed up with the war before it gets to that point. If these 40 days were indeed a biblical test for Russia, then Russia has come out the other side, bruised but seemingly unrepentant. The omens are good for Ukraine, but the war is far from won, and even a resumption of high-level peace talks feels very far away. But let's keep our eyes on the moving pieces on the horizon and stay optimistic, because hopefully, we're in for an interesting autumn.
Hi, this is Katarina Hodunova, reporter with the Kyiv Independent, and Michigan Glenn 1991 is asking, what do you think of the Russians being allowed back into the Olympics and other types of sports events? Personally, I was not surprised at all. This was entirely predictable, because before the full-scale invasion, Moscow was a major financial backer of many international sports federations and organizations. It hosted prestigious international competitions, and Russian officials held influential positions within global sports institutions, where they helped to shape policies and decision-making. And even in some organizations, those Russian representatives have remained in those positions throughout the full-scale war. And during the first year of the all-out war, many international sports bodies were shocked by Russia's actions, and although often reluctantly supported the suspension of Russia's athletes and Belarusian athletes, but today only a handful of those organizations continue to maintain this position, for example, like World Athletics. Most others have gradually brought Russian athletes back into international competition. They often justify this by appealing to the rules of fair play and arguing that sports should unite people even during the wartime. But behind those arguments is another reality. Many organizations, they just want Russian funding to return, along with Moscow's political and financial support. At the same time, it's very important to notice that and to understand how difficult it is to find allies within the international sports community, because the rules of many sports federations prohibit athletes from political demonstrations, and violations are often met with severe penalties. For example, we can recall a case of Ukrainian skeleton athlete Vladislav Hiroskevich, who was disqualified at the Olympics because he wore a helmet with Ukrainian with photos of Ukrainian athletes who were killed during the wartime in Ukraine. It was not a political move, it was more like a move of remembrance, but still he was disqualified. And many athletes, international athletes, they may support Ukraine, but they are often reluctant to show it publicly because their careers are at stake. And speaking out of participation in protests could lead to disqualification as well, not only from a single competition, but for example, for entire season or even more seasons to come. And the reality is that for Ukraine, the situation is extremely complicated and extremely difficult for Ukrainian athletes as well. But international sports organizations can and should be pressed. Governments of Ukraine's partner countries, as well as international bodies like, for example, European Union, they have tools for this. For example, personal and collective sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and restrictions on Russian officials and athletes entering countries that host international competitions. Unfortunately, Ukraine cannot win this fight alone.
That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you appreciated this video, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community. It's truly thanks to viewers like you that we can do this work, and we're so grateful for your support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.